Garmagath Cahirlik. Can I thank the deputies for raising this really important issue, and I want to acknowledge the strong political and public interest in the development of the National Maternity Hospital, or the NMH. Firstly, and as I've said many times, I want to emphasise that the government is fully committed to the development of the new National Maternity Hospital, and this is clearly laid out in the programme for government. The fact that concerns are being raised from some quarters in relation to the ownership and in relation to the governance of the new National Maternity Hospital is also recognised by the government. However, before addressing these concerns, I think it would be beneficial to remind ourselves of the overall vision for what is a vitally important once-in-a-generation project. We know that many maternity services should be co-located with adult acute services. We know that maternity services should be co-located with adult acute services to ensure mothers have access to a full range of medical and support services, in this case via a corridor linkage should the need arise. That's why it is government policy to co-locate all standalone maternity hospitals with adult acute services to ensure that we can provide the best possible healthcare to women and babies, the right care at the right time in the right place. The buildings at Holles Street are simply no longer fit for purpose, and there's an urgent need to replace them. In particular, Chair, I'm advised that the infrastructure does not enable the National Maternity Hospital to adhere to current healthcare standards and presents increased clinical risk for patients and for staff, while also increasing the risk of infection and compromising the privacy and the dignity of patients. These shortcomings have been highlighted in a number of reports which colleagues will be aware of. So the new hospital is a vital piece of infrastructure. It's one that will help to underpin the development of maternity services and the implementation of the National Maternity Strategy into the future in two ways. Firstly, this will be a dedicated, custom-built maternity hospital that is designed to deliver excellence in maternity care and to be one of the most sustainable hospital buildings in Europe. Secondly, the new hospital will achieve the long-awaited objective of co-location with an adult acute facility, which is international best practice. Co-location with St. Vincent's will make the wide range of general medical, surgical and diagnostic facilities on the St. Vincent Healthcare Group campus available to any woman who needs to be transferred from the adjacent maternity hospital. This will result in care provision that is far superior to the existing situation. Co-locating the new hospital with St. Vincent's also builds on the long-standing working relationship between the National Maternity Hospital and St. Vincent's. A significant proportion of consultant staff at the National Maternity Hospital are employed by and work between the two hospitals. This creates the ideal platform to achieve the clinical ideals of co-location. So the vision for this project is simply to deliver the best possible healthcare for women and for babies. We've already made significant progress on this major capital plan. Planning permission for the new hospital was secured in 2017. This paved the way for the contract for enabling works, and these relate to a replacement pharmacy building and to a car park extension to be awarded in 2018, and I'm very happy to report that these works are now completed. In terms of the construction of the new hospital itself, as required under the Public Spending Code, the Department of Health is currently reviewing the draft final business case for the hospital, and in due course this will then undergo the required consideration from the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. Separate to the business case and to the Public Spending Code requirements, the other important element that must be addressed is the ownership and the governance arrangements for the new hospital, and that is, I believe, where people's concerns are. In essence, if I may try to encapsulate these concerns, the primary one is a fear that religious influence would prevent certain services, such as termination of pregnancy or sterilisation, would prevent these being provided to women in the new hospital. I think we all agree that there are no circumstances in which this should be allowed to happen. There is no circumstance in which any service should be denied. Our new National Maternity Hospital must be a hospital that permits and provides all lawfully permissible services to women who require them. This is a red line issue for me as Minister for Health. It is a red line issue for this government, and I will not be bringing any proposals to government unless they provide absolute assurance that all legally permissible services are provided in the new hospital. In addition, I must ensure that the ownership and the governance arrangements protect the state's significant investment in the new hospital. Work has been ongoing over a considerable amount of time now to finalise a legal framework that sets out clearly the ownership and the governance arrangements. Why do we need a legal framework at all? As colleagues will be aware, our public hospitals are a mix of state-owned and voluntary hospitals. Voluntary hospitals, including both St Vincent's and the National Maternity Hospital, as well as several others, are of course core providers within our public health system, and indeed many are tertiary referral centres for the most complex of care. In general, the state does not own voluntary hospital buildings, but it is not unusual for the state to invest in voluntary hospital campuses as part of ensuring facilities are fit for purpose. Needless to say, any investment by the state on a voluntary hospital campus must be done with all necessary assurance around safeguarding the state's investment and the delivery, obviously, of public services. In this case, we're relocating one voluntary hospital to the campus of another voluntary hospital and into the hospital building owned by the state. A legal framework will provide the necessary clarity and assurances for the state. The legal framework aims to address the state's core objectives regarding this project, and these, I think, Cathaoirleach, are worth emphasising again. Firstly, that all clinically appropriate services that are legally permissible are provided for women who need them in the new National Maternity Hospital. Secondly, to prevent any undue influence, be that religious or any other undue influence, in the operation of the new hospital. And thirdly, to protect the state's investment in relation to capital, revenue and service provision at the public hospital for the public good. The legal framework is based on the Mulvey Agreement. As this House will be aware from previous statements and debates on this issue, this sets out the proposed corporate and clinical governance arrangements for the new National Maternity Hospital. The Mulvey Agreement was finalised in 2016 following extensive mediation between the National Maternity Hospital and St Vincent's Healthcare Group and has been published now for a considerable period of time. The Mulvey Agreement provides for the establishment of a new company, the National Maternity Hospital at Elm Park, DAC. The independence of the National Maternity Hospital at Elm Park, DAC, which will run the new hospital, is core to the future governance arrangements. The legal arrangements will ensure that no services in the new National Maternity Hospital will be permitted or denied based on religious beliefs or ethical codes of hospitals concerned, and that all lawfully permissible services will be provided as they are in the current National Maternity Hospital. I might just repeat that, Chair, because it really goes to the core, I think, of some of the concerns that have been expressed. The legal arrangements will ensure that no services in the new National Maternity Hospital will be prohibited, that no services will be prohibited, that no services will be denied based on religious belief or ethical codes of the hospitals concerned. All lawfully permissible services will be provided, as I think it's really important to remind ourselves they currently are in the National Maternity Hospital. The Religious Sisters of Charity will not play any role in the governance of the new National Maternity Hospital. They will not play any role in the operation of the new National Maternity Hospital, and they've resigned from St Vincent's Hospital Group Board. In addition, it's important to recognise that clinicians at the National Maternity Hospital have repeatedly and publicly expressed their support for the relocation of the St Vincent's University Hospital campus, including in letters to the Irish Times both last year and earlier this year. More recently, 52 clinicians working at the National Maternity Hospital wrote to me and wrote to the Taoiseach and expressed real concern about what they called the misinformation and misunderstanding that they said was disturbing staff and patients and potentially putting this essential project in jeopardy, certainly the timing of it. These are the people on the front line. These are the people delivering babies. They're the people supporting women. They're the people who are providing all of the services right now and who understand how important and how necessary this facility is. And just maybe to preempt some of the debate, it was suggested in an earlier debate, Chair, falsely suggested that I am somehow accusing people of things. I'm not. The letter I have is from, Chair, is from the nurse, from the midwives and from the doctors in the National Maternity Hospital. And what they are saying is they're extremely concerned about a combination of misinformation and misunderstanding. This is what they're saying. They're saying, and I quote, "Concerns being raised that the new National Maternity Hospital will be curtailed by any religious ethos are misleading and ill-informed." They go on to say the concerns being raised about the ownership of the hospital, with the suggestion that only under full state ownership can the avoidance of religious influence be assured. And they've said, again, this is manifestly false. So I just want to put on the record, because false accusations were made earlier and no doubt will be repeated in this debate. I've just read from the letter from the midwives and the doctors to me and to the Taoiseach. Geherlik, the government's commitment to the National Maternity Hospital is in keeping with our broader commitment to delivering better health outcomes for the women of Ireland. As discussed in the earlier debate on the Women's Health Action Plan, the government is investing significant funding in women's health services to ensure that improvements are made and outcomes for people using the services are enhanced. This commitment is reflected in Budget 2022, for example, with an additional allocation of €31 million for new developments to specifically support women's health, and those measures have a full year cost of nearly €50 million. This includes very significant investment to further progress the implementation of the National Maternity Strategy, gynaecology service developments, as well as a further €5 million for a dedicated women's health fund for this year. I hope that the next time we are giving statements on the National Maternity Hospital in this House, we'll be able to speak about the finalisation of the legal framework in what undoubtedly will be a significant milestone for achieving the goal of a new National Maternity Hospital as envisaged in the National Maternity Strategy. As the House will be very aware, the National Maternity Strategy sets out a vision for future maternity services where women are treated with dignity and respect in an appropriate physical environment. It is essential, therefore, that we move forward and build the new National Maternity Hospital and provide the necessary infrastructure to facilitate the delivery of safe, high-quality maternity services for women and for infants. And I'm certain that we will do that with all of the necessary safeguards and assurances. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The next Sinn Féin, Deputies David Cullinan and Louise O'Reilly, sharing 10 minutes on the basis of 6.5 and 3.5 respectively. Deputy David Cullinan.
I had a scripted speech, Minister, but I just want to respond to your speech instead, if I can. And I don't think, first of all, there's anything new in your speech. I think we would have been expecting a bit more. And I have to say, everything that is in this speech has been already said, and I don't see anything in it that adds any additionality to what we have already seen. You say, Minister, and we agree on this, so you say in your opening statement, and I'll repeat it, that this is a red line issue for you, that there can be no religious interference, that we need to get the issues of governance and ownership right. And you say that you will not bring any proposal to government unless it provides absolute assurance that all legally permissible services are provided in the new hospital, and in addition, that you will ensure that the ownership and governance arrangements protect the state's significant investment in this new hospital. So in terms of that objective, I share it, and I'm sure everybody in this House shares it, but we need to see that become a reality. There's three key issues. There's the ownership, which is important. There is the governance of the hospital, which is also very important, and then the provision of services without any influence of any kind, and you've accepted that that is important as well. You say then in your opening statement, Minister, that the HSE or the state will own the building. So we've known that, but what about the land? So what will be the legal arrangement in relation to the land? I don't see anything in your opening statement that refers at all to the land. You then say, Minister, and you say this isn't you say this is coming from healthcare workers, which I have huge respect for, that you say wrote to national newspapers, which we know they did, but you say through them, and this is what I'm taking from your opening contribution, you're talking about misinformation and misunderstanding. You can't, on the one hand, say that you accept that there are genuine, legitimate concerns, which we have all raised in relation to governance and other issues, and then say that there is misinformation or misunderstanding without giving a bit more context. And I really hope that what we're not seeing here is playing professionals, which I have respect for, off the opposition, because I think that would be the wrong road for you to go down, Minister, and I think that would be unacceptable. They can speak for themselves. And if you're saying that they don't have a difficulty with any of those issues that we have they seen something that we haven't seen? Because in your opening statement, again, you say that you talk about the legal framework. I haven't seen the legal framework. I don't know what's in it. You say that you will bring a memo to Cabinet that will address the concerns which have been raised by the opposition and by campaigners and others as well. We need to see that legal framework. At the very least, that will have to come before the Oireachtas Health Committee. It will have to be fully interrogated. I would go as far as saying, Minister, a special Oireachtas committee would need to be set up, because for me this is fundamental. You know, and you stood where I stood in opposition over many, many years, as did many of your colleagues, railing against how the state treated women, how the state failed women when it came to healthcare. We know about all of the mistakes, and we discussed some of them this morning when we talked about the women's healthcare strategy and plan which has been put in place. So women are not going to take you or anybody else at face value unless they see the detail, and unless we have an opportunity to properly interrogate the legal framework that you say that you have secured and that deals with all of our concerns. So I would ask you, Minister, when you're responding later, will you commit to at least the Health Committee being given an opportunity to interrogate that legal framework when it is agreed and before you take it to Cabinet, or that you will establish a special Oireachtas committee, because I think this issue is so fundamentally important. So I have to say, Minister, that I'm a bit disappointed, I have to say, because this was built up as an opportunity for you to once and for all put to bed the concerns that people have. And the concerns are very simple. We're going to spend huge amounts of money on this hospital, and we should. There is no quarrel about the need for a new national maternity hospital. In fact, I don't have a problem with the actual site itself and the location, because I think it ticks all of the boxes. I do have a concern that we could spend up to €1 billion, and yes, we own the building, but we don't own the land. I do have a concern about the convoluted system and the convoluted governance model which appears to be put in place. I think that is problematic, and I'm not, I have to say, comforted by what I've seen here today. And I am disappointed that there is nothing new in what you've said today that you didn't say in the previous 3 occasions that we in this Oireachtas have discussed before. I've heard nothing new. So I think you have to do better, Minister. I think you have to properly meet the concerns that we have, and I don't believe in this opening statement they have been met. So I would ask that you reflect on that, and I would ask that when you come back that you will confirm that the opposition and the Oireachtas will have the full and proper opportunity to interrogate this legal framework that you say deals with the concerns. We have to be also consulted, and I have to make up my own mind, as others I'm sure will as well, that it does address those concerns, Minister. But I have to say, I do have concerns. Thank you.
Minister, I came in here to hear some answers, and unfortunately I haven't. And we might as well say that, because that's what we had hoped to get from you. There's no dispute, I don't think anyone in the House disputes the need for a maternity hospital. I can say I gave birth in Holles Street in 1995. We needed a new hospital then. When my daughter gave birth to my grandson in Holles Street in 2015, we needed one then. So nobody is disputing that this hospital is necessary. We know how necessary it is. We know that the men and women that are working there day in, day out, and the women who are attending there are doing so in appalling circumstances. So the need for the new hospital is absolutely established and understood. But I mean, it's 5 years since we passed the Sinn Féin motion calling for the new maternity hospital to be built as quickly as possible. We all agreed on that. Entirely within public ownership and with legally guaranteed independence from all non-medical influence in its clinical operations. And that is the piece that just needs to be got right. Because there are very profound reasons why women in particular, but us in general, are very concerned about the governance arrangements and the influence, and that thing which you might not be able to codify, but that thing which is the chilling effect. and the chilling effect of any association with the church, I think, is what is causing the consternation. The go-ahead was given by the Vatican in 2020 for the transfer of the lands earmarked for the hospital to a new charity group. Again, there are huge questions around that process. The move left us a step closer, but it did raise again and put the spotlight on the ownership and the control. The decision to transfer the land from the church to the St Vincent's Holding Group raised the question, and why was it not gifted to the state? This has never been clarified, and the fundamental question still remains unanswered. Who will the hospital belong to? We know who will own the building, but who will own the land, and how will that impact on the care, and how will that impact on how women are treated in the hospital? This issue has been fraught with debate and difficulties around what should be a fairly straightforward matter. It should be simply that the independence in all of its clinical operations is guaranteed, and that is simply what we seek. The questions around the legal terms of ownership of the entire campus still remain. For years now, we've been asking these questions, and we still don't have any sufficient answers. And I did come in here this evening hoping to get some of those questions answered, and I haven't learned anything beyond what I knew when I came in here. Minister, before in the time I have left, I want to mention, and I did this previously again today, but March is her anniversary month. I want to mention Sheila Hodges, and as you know, I knew Sheila. Sheila died in March 1983, and so did her baby. Sheila was denied treatment because of the ethos of the hospital. That is why she died. That is what killed her. So, you know, I know what's written on her death cert, and I know what killed her. And while the influence in 1983 was very explicit, it is no less worrying, disconcerting and troubling in 2022 that there would be even a hint or a suggestion of any influence. That is why we need answers to the questions that have been raised. It's a chilling effect today. It was, well, do you know, I'm not going to use the word for what it was in 1983, but we all know what happened to Sheila in 1983 and to her baby. So for all of our lived experience suggests that we have to get this right. The statement that you have given us this evening suggests that we haven't got it right yet. But there is unanimity in terms of our support for the hospital being built. We know that that has to happen. But Minister, we have to get it right. Go on, Michael.
Minister, in the last year, we've had 3 private members' motions and this evening's debate, and nothing seems to have moved forward. And we're now seems to be waiting on a legal framework when fundamentally the decision not to build and invest what will ultimately now be maybe close to £1 billion, who knows, hundreds of millions of euro on a much needed national maternity hospital. The decision not to build that on public grounds has led to where we are now. Now, I agree with Deputy Cullinan, we need to see this legal framework. I'd like to know in your summing up what the timeline of that legal framework is going to be. But I have huge concerns about that. I feel like at this stage, I'm not sure anyone is going to have any satisfaction in terms of the contents of that legal framework. Such is the level of valid concern. And you've said yourself, people on the side of the House have valid concerns. I mean, we would, you know, I'd much rather be over here welcoming a national maternity hospital and maybe debating over spiralling costs or something, you know, like in those regards. But we don't want to be having these debates. We don't want to bring 3 private members' motions. Deputy O'Reilly, who spoke towards me, again raises her experience with Sheila Hodges. And every time she mentions that, it crystallises in one case why there is such a chilling generational impact and why these concerns are valid. It's because of those cases. And unfortunately, what you've said to what you've read out this evening, there's absolutely nothing new, Minister. So we need a timeline on when this legal framework is. I want a commitment that it's going to come to committee. I want a commitment as well that it will be discussed in the Dáil, because, Minister, the spectre and the legacy of Catholic influence on our education system, on every other part of society, but particularly on our health system, is such that in a modern Ireland, in a post-repeal Ireland, and all the strides that we've made, when we have hundreds of millions of euro and we've loads of options on the table, that we are going to enter into an agreement, whatever that agreement may be, whatever safeguards, whatever legal framework, but there will be always concerns that a Catholic institution, through whatever mechanism, through whatever lay company, however it is constructed, will have an influence. And as I said in a previous contribution on this, we so far have not got any guarantees that there won't even be religious iconography on the walls, never mind religious influence on the clinical practice. And I understand the concerns of the clinicians in the National Maternity Hospital who desperately want a modern, a much needed modern building in which to work. As someone who has been a birthing partner in the National Maternity Hospital, I've seen its limitations. I've seen the limitations on the great care that is given there by the sheer fact that the building is no longer fit for purpose. No one is arguing with the decision for co-location. That is the way it should be done. That's the way we need to go. But Minister, the government have made, starting with the previous government, a massive rod for its own back here, and none of this concern is contrived. None of it is false. And anyone who is speaking on this issue or any other issues related to women's health would much rather be focusing on other issues, or indeed other issues in terms of the speed of delivery, but not about clinical governance. And unfortunately, we are where we are, and it is quite a depressing and grim space. And I just hope that you will be able to give some clarity on when this legal framework will come, and hopefully this legal framework will provide some kind of comfort, but unfortunately, I'm not sure that it will. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Next is the government slot. Deputy Alan Farrell has 9 minutes.
Look, I think there is an understandable distrust that has been articulated in this House on several occasions, and indeed outside it. And whether it's legitimate or not in 2022 is not for me to determine, it's for others to feel. But I do understand members of the opposition making statements that they've made this evening and indeed on other occasions. The bottom line for me, though, is what the Minister has said, and Deputy Cullinan, you're right, it's not new. It has been said many, many times, and I don't think it's going to change. And the reflection of the reality of the situation versus what you might want to achieve are two different things. The Minister has said he will not bring any proposal to government unless it provides absolute assurances that all legally permissible services are provided in the new hospital, and I'm paraphrasing slightly here, that protects the state's investment in the new public hospital. And to be honest with you, if you remove a religious institution or a religious order from the ownership of the site, the entire debate becomes moot. And I think that that is a fundamental as part of this. Would I prefer that the site was owned by the state? Yes, of course I would. I don't think any of us have any difficulties with saying that. But the reality of the situation is that if this legal framework that the Minister will be bringing forward to Cabinet satisfies the requirements that he has set out, then I'm satisfied. And the only thing that I'm interested in for the rest of this debate goes back to what Deputy Smith has quite rightly pointed out, that the service be provided, that there be no iconography associated with the owner of the land, and that the services provided within the hospital are compliant with the laws set out in this House, and indeed by the medical profession itself. And that's really all that has interested me throughout this debate, even going back to 2010 and 11 when we were talking about whether it should be located at some other hospital or another facility being located elsewhere. You know, all of these discussions really are moot, and the most important point is that the services are co-located in order to provide the best possible medical care to all of those who wish to avail of it in the future. And I do think that the development of this hospital is a critical step in bringing women and girls healthcare in Ireland into the 21st century. And it'll be one of the most significant infrastructural investments in women's healthcare in the history of the state. I believe that the debate about the hospital has been often misdirected, and at worst, I believe that the narrative has been deliberately misleading by members of this House and indeed members out of the public. I think that the Minister has made it very clear, and I've repeated his own words, that no proposal will go before government unless there's an absolute guarantee that all procedures that are legally permissible will be available in the new hospital, and that is an important fact that is the only reasonable action to take. And the question of whether it will be provided to the Line Committee is a matter for government. It will be very unusual. I think, Deputy Cullinan, you might understand or accept that point, but that is a matter ultimately for the Minister and for the Cabinet. I would also draw attention to the fact that the issues regarding ownership and governance will reflect a significant investment in the hospital, and look forward to the publication, indeed, of the legal framework, which at some point in the future. The publication of this information will, of course, give clarity to the public and to staff, doctors and nurses who will be working in the maternity hospital on the governance and on governance and ownership. The necessity of the National Maternity Hospital simply cannot be overstated. The current facilities, as have been said, at Holles Street are, despite the best efforts of all staff, not fit for purpose. Maternity and neonatal care present some of the highest risk situations for patients, and as a result, hundreds of pregnant women, I should say, every year require intervention, be they surgical or medical, which are not available within the hospital. This means that hundreds of women every year have to be transferred from Holles Street to other hospitals in Dublin. This situation even extends to intensive care that is not available in the current premises. This is a practice that no one would find tolerable, whereas the new maternity hospital will cater for all of those medical and surgical needs in a state-of-the-art facility providing world-class care for people who need it most. Modern and fully equipped medical campus will allow the public to have the confidence and assuredness that they will be cared for within the highest of international standards. The pregnancy journey is often not an easy one, and it carries with it worries and risks, and when issues arise, it can result in extreme stress and worry, and therefore we owe it to every woman in the country to be able to provide them with the best possible care. And indeed, like all of us, I look forward, I should say, to the National Maternity Hospital becoming operational in the time ahead. It'll be a transformative measure for women's healthcare and for the medical care of babies in Ireland. I again want to stress that the operation of the hospital and the procedures carried out will be free from any religious influence. And this is something that people have been rightly concerned about since the early days of this debate. However, it's no longer, in my view, a legitimate concern, nor should any member of the opposition suggest otherwise or continually suggest otherwise. I think it would be untrue and disingenuous to continue with that particular line, given what has been said here today and repeatedly in the past. The Sisters of Charity will have no role in the governance of the National Maternity Hospital, and in May, indeed, they announced their decision to end their involvement. In May 2017, I should say, they announced their intention to end involvement with the hospital and transfer their shareholding to what is called the St. Vincent's Healthcare Group, to a new company called St. Vincent's Holdings, which is a charitable not-for-profit. Since 2017, they've not been involved in the functions nor operations of the holding firm and have resigned from the board in the same year. I think it's also important to note, as the Minister has brought to the attention of the House, that clinicians have publicly and vocally supported the government's position with regard to this hospital, and they have also highlighted the misleading and ill-informed narrative that has surrounded this debate. In February, as the Minister has outlined, 52 doctors wrote to senior government ministers urging them to press ahead with the vital project, saying misinformation over the site's ownership was risked derailing the project. Senior medical figures, including the National Maternity Hospital Master, Professor Shane Higgins, and 3 of his predecessors, said that the deal now on the table includes unbreakable legal stipulations to guarantee all procedures allowed under Irish law will be provided. They went on to say the concerns about the new hospital on the St. Vincent's campus at Elm Park being curtailed by any religious ethos are misleading and ill-informed. In the letter, they also said it was manifestly false to suggest that only full state ownership of the site can assure the avoidance of religious influence. It's important, this is indeed an important contribution in the debate, and one which should be heard by members of the Oireachtas and indeed the public. Cathaoirleach, in my time remaining, I would like to highlight the work being done by government in improving women's healthcare in Ireland across the board. I would particularly like to welcome the publication of the Women's Health Action Plan, 22 to 23, a significant body of work formulated through engagement with women of all ages and backgrounds across Ireland. As a result, we now have a plan to improve health outcomes and experiences of women and girls who require the services within our health system. Between now and the end of the year, we will see 9 million invested in the provision of free contraception to women aged between 17 and 25, over 8 million in additional funding for the National Maternity Strategy, over €1 million to support initial establishment of the Perinatal Genetics Service, an additional 5 million investment in the Women's Healthcare Fund, and over 5 million of which will be grown access to gynaecology clinics, raising the number of clinics to 20 nationally. These are real and transformative changes. These investments will work, and the work of this government will ensure that every woman and girl in Ireland will receive better, more efficient and more flexible healthcare services for generations to come. And I think that this goal we should all be committed to, and one which I believe we can achieve. Thank you, Ciarán.
Thank you, Deputy. Next is Sinn Féin slot, and Deputy Rhea Cronin has 3.5 minutes.
It's hard to believe that we're here in this state in 2022, and I often, when we talk about the state, I often think state is a really good word for us, because we are in a bit of a state. Here we are, we were looking for statements, and there's no additional information, there's no clarity in your statement, Minister, but here we are, still trying to sort out our National Maternity Hospital offering state-of-the-art medical services on a secular site. Women want our maternity hospital way and far beyond the reach and the neck of the old proverbial crozier. It's mad really to think that we're even having these statements, this conversation in 2022. Because in the 21st century, every woman should be able to walk into her national maternity hospital, securing the fact that she is on secular ground. Women need to know that their treatment will be strictly according to their medical needs and wishes, without even the suggestion or any look, sight or say from a religious order, its ethos or its agents. Yet here we are, and here we go in another round of talking about something that should have been done long ago, sorted and settled. We want our maternity hospital on land owned by the state, controlled by the state and run by the state, and not private companies. Just the state, and not charities either, thanks very much. Just the state and the state alone. We have reasons to be concerned because still, and on a related note, I would like to say that our treatment of pregnant women generally continues to leave a lot to be desired. Throughout COVID, which is still very much with us, women were left to birth alone without their partners or birth partners. And all the talking here was about when we would open the pubs and put in hospitality above our maternity hospitals. Instead, women were going through early birth labour alone, sometimes through delivery, with daddy being confined in the car park or out in the dark of the cold. And there were jokes on social media about we'd be better off giving birth in the pubs, because then daddies would have been allowed to be present. And on another relevant matter, COVID-19 put paid to the Coombe antenatal clinic that they ran in Naas General Hospital. And I can assure you, Minister, that the women in North Kildare are very anxious to get that back. A recent PQ reply told me that in time consideration would be given to a Midlands location, but I want to tell yourself and the HSE that Bná Kildare will not be ceding the clinic at Naas to anywhere else, and we will be loud and clear about that. In the meantime, it is absolutely crucial that all infrastructure be attended to and kept as state-of-the-art as possible. But back to the National Maternity Hospital. Holles Street holds a special place in the hearts of many women who have given birth there and experienced their first real experience of, unconditional love, having your own baby. But after 100 years of the conservative politics of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, we're still not on our own journey to make sure that our National Maternity Hospital is secular and independent. And a National Maternity Hospital offering world-class care to mothers and their babies on a site owned and run by the state and the state alone. And that's a red line issue for us. We don't want a charity, we're far beyond that, thank you very much. Because the last 100 years was way too long. It was way too long for our women and girls. And what we want to do is stand on ground that is, in its own way, sacred to us, because it caters for us. in our needs, and it doesn't answer to anybody else or to any religious order. And that really needs to be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy. Next is the Social Democrat slot. Deputies Roisin Charlton and Jennifer Whitmore share 5 minutes.
No, I'm just taking the 5 minutes, Cairla.
You're taking the 5 minutes, okay.
Thank you. Just at the outset, I just want to clarify a comment that the Minister made there. He was talking about the letter from the 52 doctors, talking about the comments, public comments being misleading and ill-informed, and the Minister said he didn't claim that. On the 25th of February, Minister, you'll recall, you posted on Facebook quoting extensively from that letter and the comments of the 52 doctors. And at the end then you said, and I quote, "I share the views of the doctors that the allegations being made, including by certain Dáil TDs, are misleading, ill-informed and manifestly false." So effectively you were saying the same thing as the doctors were saying and accusing people of who were raising concerns of misleading the public. And clearly that's completely untrue. Look, we all want to see a new national maternity hospital, a good, fit-for-purpose hospital that will serve the future generations. And we want that hospital to be modern, both in the way that it operates the services it provides and also in its ethos. And there's no guarantee, of course, that this will be independent in ethos by any means. And not only that, but we also want a hospital that is publicly owned. We shouldn't be repeating the mistakes of the past where the state abdicated responsibility for health and education, funded buildings and funded land and all for religious orders. And then, of course, in recent times we found the difficulties with that and that we couldn't take that back in any way, and much of that land is being sold at huge profit. So we want a new hospital, but the requirement is that it would have a secular ethos and will be publicly owned. And neither of those requirements are being met in this, and that's the difficulty. And this issue has been live since 2016, both for the current minister and the previous minister, Simon Harris, and neither of them were able to square that circle. And on a regular basis, we were asking, over the past 7 years, we were asking what's happening with the maternity hospital, and we were told that agreement will be reached imminently, in the coming weeks, very shortly. They were the replies. But it hasn't been possible to square that circle, as you well know, Minister, because under the present proposals, the hospital will not be publicly owned and it will not be secular. And, that is simply not acceptable to the public. And, there's a number of aspects of this. There's obviously the land, the site on which it will be built, the actual building itself, but most importantly, the company, the new National Maternity Hospital, DAC, which is the company. And the points that were made by Deputy Farrell there are completely untrue, because the proposed corporate governance structure that we've been told is going to apply is one where the maternity hospital, Holles Street, will cease to exist in its present identity. It will become a wholly owned subsidiary of St. Vincent's Holdings, a wholly owned subsidiary. So it will lose all of its independence and all of its current ethos. And you said, Minister, which is quite disingenuous, you said all the necessary services for women's healthcare are provided in Holles Street. Yes, they are, because Holles Street is not a religious hospital. It doesn't have the involvement of any religious order. But that status is going to change under these proposals. So we're changing from a situation where this started off, 7 or 8 years ago, where we were talking about co-location. And that makes sense from a health perspective. But we're no longer talking about co-location. We're talking about a takeover. This is a full takeover by St. Vincent's of our National Maternity Hospital. And that's utterly unacceptable. It's unacceptable for any hospital to be handed over into private hands, whether that's, religious or otherwise. But it's particularly obnoxious that you would consider doing that, Minister, when it's a maternity hospital. I mean, have you learned nothing from this country's recent history? And Irish women just simply do not accept this proposition, that we would have a maternity hospital that would be controlled by a religious body, a successor body to the Religious Sisters of Charity. Minister, I mean, I can understand why you're not looking up. You must be embarrassed at the prospect of doing this in light of things that you have said down through the years. I mean, why are we doing this? That's the question. Why are we doing this? Handing over a very valuable asset, a €1 billion asset, to a private entity, handing over full control of that to a successor organisation, St Vincent's Holdings, which is a company that has been established by the Religious Sisters of Charity. And that's what it is. It's a company that must uphold the values of the Religious Sisters of Charity. And nowhere in the world is there a Catholic successor hospital that provides the full range of healthcare services for women. So, you know, own up to this, Minister. What you're proposing to do, what you're claiming you're doing, is simply untrue. It cannot happen.
Next is the government slot. Minister of State Deputy Sean Fleming has 8 minutes.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, look, and I welcome the opportunity today to speak on the new National Maternity Hospital. And I think it's important to acknowledge at the outset that women have been failed for too long in this country by the state. And this government recognises this. And in relation to women's health, my colleague Minister Stephen Donnelly published the Women's Health Action Plan 2022-2023 just a while ago, and this puts women at the heart of the policy making process for the first time ever. This Women's Health Action Plan is a landmark piece of work, and it will enable us to offer better and more timely care to women with tailored services across age groups, increasing opportunities for women to become partners in their own healthcare. Women's health is the top priority for this government and is strongly supported by Budget 2022 with €31 million additional funding for the development in women's health. This funding will enable 8.6 million additional funding for continued implementation of the National Maternity Strategy. 9 million will be provided to fund access to contraception for women between the ages of 17 and 25. 5.3 million to grow access to see and treat gynecological clinics, 20 of them nationally, specialist menopause clinics to 4 nationally, and special endometriosis services to 2 nationally. 5 million to bring Women's Health Fund to an investment of 10 million to support innovative new approaches to women's health nationwide, as set out in the plan I've just mentioned, Women's Health Action Plan 2022-2023. We're talking the essence of this debate.
Each speaker have the time to speak.
The essence of this.
I'm sorry, Deputy. You know that yourself.
The essence of this debate is about women's health and children's health, and as I've said, the Women's Action Plan does deal with National Maternity Hospital issues. What I also want to say, it is rightfully a huge amount of interest. There is rightfully a hugely amount of interest in the National Maternity Hospital. And the creation of a new National Maternity Hospital is the greatest infrastructural investment by the state in the area of women's health. We are building once in a generation world-class National Maternity Hospital, and think that has to be recognised. We don't have to just look at Holles Street, we can look at the Coombe and the need for further development in due course and building of a new hospital there. So I actually think we have a lot of catching up to do to provide for maternity services in the state, not just in relation to Holles Street. It goes beyond that, but this is a key element, and the new National Maternity Hospital. This will ensure world-class facilities for women, girls and babies for generations to come. The hospitals have worked together for decades, and approximately 40% of consultant staff at the National Maternity Hospital are employed by or work between the two hospitals at present. This creates the ideal platform to achieve clinical ideals of co-location. And I think everybody has accepted the value of co-location in this particular project. It is vital to recognise the importance of co-location of maternity services. Maternity and neonatal care is among the branches of medicine of highest risk. The co-location with adult and acute services will ensure mothers have access to full range of medical and support services via corridor linkage. And it's only all too often we hear cases in relation to issues that happen in maternity hospitals in relation to the delivery of patients, and we've all seen the major difficulties that have arisen and the high risk that happens in these locations. So it's important we move to a situation through co-location that we have the maximum services available in any one campus into the future. Annually, several hundred pregnant women at Holles Street require diagnostic, medical and surgical intervention that is not available on the current hospital site and require transfer to St. Vincent's Hospital as inpatients or as outpatients. Every year, 6 to 10 women are transferred to St. Vincent's Hospital because they are critically ill and require intensive care not available on the site in Holles Street. This fragmentation of care between the two sites distorts care in some of the highest risk clinical cases in the state. The new hospital will provide women with direct access to a wide range of medical, surgical and diagnostic services and facilities. It will facilitate modern campus approach to healthcare where a range of medical entities operate in close proximity to each other to increase the breadth and depth of services concentrated together with close alignment of clinicians. In general, the state does not own voluntary hospital buildings. I want to say that again. In general, we do not own voluntary hospital buildings, but it's not unusual for the state to invest in voluntary hospital campuses as part of ensuring facilities are fit for purpose. Needless to say, any investment by the state on voluntary hospital campuses must be done with all necessary assurances around the safeguarding of the state's investment and the delivery of public services. And it's important to point out that this gets lost in this debate. In this particular case, we are relocating one voluntary hospital to the campus of another voluntary hospital and in a hospital building owned by the state. So that's a clear position of actually what's happening. The state will own the hospital building and we have one voluntary hospital moving to the campus of another voluntary hospital. A legal framework will provide the necessary clarity and assurances for the state, and the legal framework will deal with the state's core objectives regarding this project, and they're worth noting again. One, that all clinically appropriate services that are legally permissible are provided for women who need them in the new National Maternity Hospital. This is an absolute, not just as the Minister said, a red line issue. It's an absolute issue, I think, for everybody in the state that should be the case. We also want to prevent any undue influence, religious or otherwise, in the operation of the new hospital, and we want to protect the state's investment in relation to capital revenue and services provision at the new hospital for the public good. I understand the points that have been made, and I can understand the key issues that are being highlighted by a number of deputies here, but we do want to ensure we can continue having this debate, or we continue to have the services provided. We all know the time scale that it takes to build a hospital of this nature. It goes on for several years, and I think some preparatory work has already been done on the site, and as the Minister said earlier, that has now been completed, and it's important that we move carefully but as swiftly as possible to ensure those legal agreements are put in place to cover those three arrangements, such that the project then can move on through the normal process that ultimately will provide much better services than currently are arranged and available in the current situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The next slot is People Before Profit. Deputies Breen Smith and Paul Murphy sharing 5 minutes.
No, I'm just, you're taking the
You're
whole
taking
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
He can get lost, he's getting none of it. Look, something intrigues me, and this is not to insult anybody, but I am intrigued that there's not a single female member of the 3 government parties here to talk about this issue. Not a single one. Now, they might all have to go home and mind the kids, I don't know, but I think it would have been appropriate for at least 1 or 2 of them to be here to defend this issue, because it would have been appropriate, because it's government policy to impose this new structure, this government policy to impose this structure on us. And there are women in the government parties. They should be here to defend this position. That's the first thing I want to just observe. The second thing I want to observe is, Minister Donnelly, your statement is extraordinary. We have been pulling teeth to get this statement here today. Pulling teeth, literally. All of us here in the opposition repeatedly asking for time to debate this, and we get nothing new in it, except omissions. Where have you dropped the 99-year lease that you then announced was increased to 299-year lease on the land? That seems to be gone from the historical record. Why is that? I am really intrigued by this question, because all of this convoluted, complex way of doing business from one voluntary hospital to the other, from staff that work in both, from a holding company to a subsidiary, wholly owned ultimately by the Sisters of Charity, but yet the nuns have resigned from the board and they've nothing to do with it and we have nothing to worry about. And we're all a bit hysterical anyway, aren't we? We're all a bit, over the top and hysterical and worried. I wonder why. I wonder, has it anything at all to do with around 200 years of oppression and control by the church of our bodies, our lives, and the hopes that we had held for the future for women and girls in this country after repeal was won? Has it anything to do with that? Isn't it bizarre that you, on the other side of the house, find us niggling and annoying because we keep asking this, because we look for this debate, and then you come in, you don't even explain to us how this whole process is working. And we will come out of here believing at the end of it, as will the people in the gallery, that you intend to hand over €1 billion worth of taxpayers' money in a new maternity, state-of-the-art hospital with the best facilities and all the rest of it, into the control of a religious order who has a legacy in this state of running Magdalen laundries and having illegal adoptions through the St. Patrick Guild. Now, has it anything to do with history? Has it anything to do with the position of women for decades in this country? And shame on you. Were you still sitting up beside me there when we had to share the same row when you were in opposition? You'd be saying exactly the same thing now. But you've completely done a U-turn on your position on it. And I do want to make reference to one line here in your statement. You say, secondly, to prevent any undue influence, religious or otherwise. Why don't you just say to prevent any influence, any religious influence in its totality? Why are you sticking in the word undue? My undue mightn't be your undue. I really am suspicious of what's going on here. And I also really resent the idea that you spend all your time listening to those on the front line. Respect and all to the 52 professionals that wrote to you, but you must listen to them because they are the professionals. You've had nothing to say in response to the INMO you called today for reintroduction of masking in order to prevent the situation in the hospitals with COVID getting out of control. I haven't heard a single statement from you. If you're the one that listens to the nurses and the doctors all the time, why aren't you responding? Why aren't you responding to that? Now, I'm not just looking to pick holes in it, but there are a huge amount of holes, and I haven't got time to go through them all in your statement. And we are bitterly disappointed that we haven't gained an inch of ground in this whole debacle. But finally, I want to make this point. Whatever about the nuns, and there is a really serious case there to be answered of the religious influence, undue or otherwise, whatever about the nuns, what you are doing is you're handing the future of a maternity hospital, publicly funded, the wages and the maintenance and the running of the hospital will be paid for by Joe Blogg's taxpayer and Josephine Blogg's taxpayer. You're handing it over to a private company. Now, does that not fly in the face of Sláinte Care? Does it not fly in the face of the future of all our health services in this country? We have made huge mistakes by having combinations of voluntary, religious run and all sorts of machinations. What we fundamentally need to do now is to make a break, and now is the opportunity, make a break, separate church and state, and have the state own, run and control the new National Maternity Hospital.
Thank you, Deputy. Now, the next speaker is yours truly. So, with your permission, I propose to swap, if that's agreeable. Oh, the camcorder is here. All things come there.
The opportunity of contributing. Musical chairs.
And Can Corla, I'm glad to have an opportunity to speak on this hugely important piece of legislation. And like everybody else here, I would be strongly of the opinion of the need to ensure the independence of the new National Maternity Hospital. And we've spoken about this many times, those of us who were on the Health Committee. We've spoken about it many times before, and I'm sure we'll speak about it again. So our intention is quite clear: to deliver as promised many times, albeit belatedly, a modern facility to support the women who need that particular support and that particular service, unlimited, unabridged, now and in the future. I think it is coming very late. I think it is coming after all the debate and all the talk about the need to look after women's health, to provide for women's health and so on and so forth. Hopefully, it is coming now. I'm a bit worried about the crossfire in relation to it, unless on the basis that it might delay the provision of the hospital that is necessary. On the one hand, I absolutely and emphatically support the independence of the hospital, the maternity hospital, and it must be that. I have no reason to disbelieve that what the Minister is suggesting is anything other than that. I have to see it, despite I accept the concerns expressed by people. But all the information that I have to go on, and I'm a member of the Health Committee still as well, is that the Minister proposes to deliver. Now, there are conditions relating to it that would, in the political reality, if a minister doesn't deliver, it's a serious issue. And the Minister knows that, and we all know that. So I believe that he has no intention of misleading the House or in any way misleading the women of Ireland at this particular time, on this particular subject, and this very important subject. I have to say that first of all, I want to talk about the long-standing need. The long-standing need is this, that we have talked about it for long enough. We have identified that we must have a modern hospital. It must be the best that can be provided at the time, and it must serve the women of Ireland and the families of Ireland now and in the future, without restriction from any source, without influence from any source, without interference of any description whatsoever, in independent national maternity hospital. That's what the women of Ireland wanted, that's what the women of Ireland deserve, and that's what we are bound to deliver to them. That's what the government is bound to deliver to them. So I would have to say that at this stage, I see no evidence whatsoever, other than a concern. There is a concern that there would naturally be at one's concern in any event. Whether or not it is well-founded will remain to be seen. I believe that it is not well-founded. I believe it is general caution, and I think that it is up to the government and up to the Minister, whoever the Minister may be at the time, to deliver, and whoever the government may be at the time to deliver. So I expect that that's going to happen. I think that it is the least that we might offer to the women of Ireland at this particular stage. And let's face it, we're good at talking in this country. We're great at speculating in this country. We are great at promising long years in advance. And then we talk about the details afterwards. And let us not be in any doubt about it at all. We shouldn't allow the talk on the details to deter us from our continuation of the need to provide what is a vital service for the women of Ireland. If we do that, if we drag the debate back into speculation and doubt and more of it, then we're going in the wrong direction. So we need to trust each other, make sure that we deliver, that we are kept to delivery by the opposition as necessary. And my good friend is looking at me here. I have to say this. We have to trust on somebody sometime. I am as well versed as anybody in the House, I can tell you, on this subject. And I've been longer in the House than most of the people in the House. And I want to say this, that I have no reason to believe that it is the intention of the government or the Minister to mislead the public, the women in the House and in the country. There's no reason to believe that at all. And the Minister knows that. And I think the opposition know that as well. And for those who want to second guess all of us and presume that we mere males shouldn't have an opinion on this issue, I want to say this. I would apply the same principles in relation to all care for all people of all ages in all conditions. And the condition and the basis on which we have a right to speak is the one of equality. We have a right and a concern, despite the fact that maybe some people have suggested in recent times that perhaps that the male population were opposed to the women of Ireland. Not true. And we want to state that emphatically now. That is the wrong way to go about. It's the wrong debate to have in this country at this particular time. It's divisive, it's misleading, and it is destructive. So I want to say this, that to put I'm sorry for diverting Can Corla, but the fact of the matter is this: the women of Ireland need the service. They need an up-to-date service, a modern service, a reliable service that is not subject to the interference of anybody, not from any quarter, and that they have ready access to it, that nobody impedes their right to avail of whatever service is available in that hospital, and that is an independent service, will be governed by the legislation from here. And the last point I want to make, I note the point that was made about the subsidiary of a wholly owned subsidiary by the parent company. That's company law, which we all know a small bit about and have had to learn about in our own particular way. There are exceptions where the wholly owned subsidiary can deviate very dramatically, but we want to make sure that it doesn't impede the delivery of the service that is required. Independent service. I agree with you entirely. But there is a need to allow the process to continue in order that the service may be provided, that we don't have to wait another 10 years or 15 years, and we don't, above all things, get into a debate about an alternative site, which we have had in relation to almost every hospital that I can think of. The one place we should not go is into deciding in the House as to which would be the most important site. We're back 10 years, we're back 20 years if that starts. So, Can Corla, I want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity of speaking on this subject. I admit that I'm a mere male, that I only represent half the population. My intentions are sincere and genuine, just as well as anybody in that side of the House, or regardless of gender. And you know, we're not always wrong, those of us who spent a bit of while in the House. And I accept your views and listen to your views carefully, and I will do so again. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Durkin. I'm glad I was back in time to allow you make that contribution. We move ahead now, and I think our next contributor is Deputy Matt Shanahan, please.
Gurmaga, Can Corla, can I just read an excerpt from the Irish Times, please? From Wednesday, February 16th, 2022. It said the Taoiseach said the process of relocating the National Maternity Hospital has gone on for far too long. He also said that major health projects need to be delivered much more quickly than they are at present. It is not acceptable, he said. Further, he told the Dáil that there would be no involvement or influence in any way from religious allegations when the hospital moves from Holles Street, Dublin, to a site at Elm Park. The Elm Park site would come under the control for 299 years after its transfer to the National Maternity Hospital from St Vincent's Hospital Group under a licensing agreement. Mr Martin said there would be no involvement or influence from any religious organisation, be it Catholic or whatever, in this new facility. End of. So I think it's fair to say, Can Corla, that religious ethos is not going to be a dominant feature in the medical politics at this new maternity hospital. Regarding the need for a new Dublin maternity hospital, no one could argue, I think, regarding the needs for an upgraded maternity services from Holles Street Hospital. The Minister has outlined it, and indeed people know that building was never designed for the number of patients, the number of possible procedures required, or the development or innovation that has taken place in modern medical therapies, which oftentimes require significant theatre and operating room space and machinery to accommodate. I think, Can Corla, no one could argue either that the needs and the safety of mothers and infants in this country should be paramount in our society, and I know we are all agreed on that. But can I raise other questions regarding the development of this hospital beyond its recognised need within the Dublin healthcare ecosystem? My questions emanate from my interest in healthcare, particularly in how healthcare operates in the regions, as opposed to in Dublin or Cork, for example. My first question is, what are the associated proposed costs of this project? Initial estimates some years ago suggested the completed hospital would be built for €400 million. National press in the last number of weeks is now touting a figure closer to €800 million. Given that we have not completed nor even close to a finishing cost for the National Children's Hospital, which will likely top out close to €2 billion, what should the cut-off point of spending on this new National Maternity Hospital be? I'd remind the House that there is mooted to be a second Dublin Maternity Hospital move required soon, that being the Rotunda Hospital, possibly moving to Connolly Blanchardstown. And that is before what will surely be the next discussion in national maternity services, that being the potential adjoining of some maternity hospital unit to the new National Paediatric Hospital. The issue of shortcomings in terms of dealing with babies who require immediate surgical intervention post-delivery has been well known in Dublin and beyond for years. How long more, I wonder, Count Corley, before the national capital call out to spend whatever is required to physically conjoin maternity hospital services to the new National Children's Hospital? All the while conveniently forgetting how much has already been committed to this project. All the while conveniently sidestepping that maternity co-location to the new National Children's Hospital site choice was not the primary driver in deciding its location. It was in fact ignored, and that deliberate oversight is a stain on the integrity of those who were involved in that decision process. A decision and an unnecessary bill that taxpayers of Ireland and patients nationally will have to continue to suffer for years. It is heartening to know, Count Corley, when it comes to spending money in Dublin, budgets come way down the list of significant political considerations. I might digress to my own hospital, University Hospital Waterford, which I have spoken on many times in this House. It is the Southeast Regional Heart Attack Centre, and it continues, despite all political promises over the last number of years, to still only offer a 39 hours per week cardiac access for emergency cardiac catheterisation. It is still allowing the needless damage to patients as they incur delay in accessing emergency stenting in other regional centres. Despite this hospital being the most efficient in terms of bed management, patient trolleys, COVID pathways in the entire South West Hospital Group, we can garner no dull debate on why this hospital has the lowest capital budgets of the 9 Model 4s in this country. Despite it having a patient population of over 550,000, no one is asking for an emergency task force to decide granting the resources we need to deal with our 50,000 outpatients waiting list. No one is asking why this hospital has the lowest number of healthcare staff per bed ratio across the entire Model 4s in this country. Why we should fumble with 2,196 health service personnel, for example Limerick, with 3,600 staff, a similar sized hospital but treating a catchment of 100,000 less. No one, it appears, in Dublin or Dáil Éireann has any interest in exploring why UHW, in respect of nearly every business case or capital development it has proposed that would increase its bed allocations or develop additional treatment space or increase staffing for that matter, why it meets nothing but resistance and deliberate delay and obstruction over years in its desire to develop additional services. Count Corley, I have sympathy for the issues that continue to occupy the building of a new maternity hospital in South Dublin. But my experience and that of South East patients tells me that Dublin medical lobbyists and politicians will find a way to deliver this project. And they will continue to do so, even while they continue to ignore the many valid claims for equity in healthcare spend for citizens of this country, those who live outside the pale.
Thank you, Deputy Shanahan. Our next contributor is Government Deputy Paul McAuliffe, please.
Ken Corley. Well, first of all, I welcome the opportunity to contribute on this issue. We have heard that there have been 3 different private members' business on this issue, and unfortunately, private members' business does not allow for time for government backbenchers to speak, and so I welcome the opportunity for statements which do. Secondly, I think I was here in the chamber on 2 successive weeks when different members of opposition called for this time to be made available statements, and I suppose During the course of the debate, I have wondered whether these statements have come too early in advance of the government's final decision. And I suppose that depends on whether you believe that the minister's decision will be different based on the debate tonight. And I suppose the Dáil should be used to try and influence change on government. But in my view, that we are speaking in somewhat of a vacuum because that final legal framework is not yet available. Those final details, the squaring of the circle, which Deputy Shortall referenced, it has not been finalised. And so it's very difficult to comment on what the final arrangements will be in advance of it. So I suppose at this point, all I can go on, and all many of us certainly in Fianna Fáil government TDs have to go on, is the commitment that the Minister has given to the House, but more importantly, the commitment he has given to us at successive parliamentary party meetings when numerous members of our parliamentary party have raised this matter with him. And off the top of my head, I can think of people like Jennifer Murnane O'Connor, Mary Fitzpatrick, Erin McGrean, Catherine Arda, Fiona O'Loughlin, and many others who have spoken with the Minister about it. In fact, it has dominated a number of our parliamentary party meetings. And I say that because there are people here present, because there are people looking on. This debate has been extensive. Our opportunity to influence the Minister is in that forum. And at that forum, the Minister has given us the guarantees that he has given the House here. And I suppose there's two areas. One is the area of religious influence, and the second one is the financial or legal arrangements that would protect the state's investments. And I think both of those are absolutely crucial, and they will be the test by which we will judge whether this proposal will pass. And I think both of them are based on a legacy in two areas as well. And Deputy Durkin, I don't often disagree with you, but when you say it's not about male Ireland versus female Ireland, we have to accept that male Ireland let women down for decades, and therefore it is utterly understandable to have genuine concerns and fears that are expressed by members of the opposition, but more importantly by women who are contacting many of our constituency offices. And their fear is that there will be religious influence on the services that are provided. And that is justifiable, and anybody that has read any of the reports that have come before this House will know the reasons for those very justifiable concerns. The second one is the financial arrangements. And Ireland has a legacy of the state allowing religious orders to provide social services, and then those social services being transferred into voluntary organisations. And while some of those voluntary organisations retain a religious ethos and others don't, there is a complex mix of voluntary providers providing health and education and disability services and so on. And I think it is clear in the House that as the state has matured, as we have grown in our economic ability, there is a desire that we would continue to have, that we should have more state control, more state governance of the social services that we provide. And we can see that in the discussion on childcare or on disabilities, and I've heard the Taoiseach and the Minister and many others saying that. The difficulty is we are at this point where we're trying to construct a national maternity hospital. We know from a medical perspective the right thing to do with that is for it to be co-located. We know the current relationship between the two hospitals dictates that St Vincent's and the National Maternity Hospital are the right combination, but we also know that the St Vincent's Hospital is a voluntary hospital. It is not a state hospital. So, given the legacy of religious interference and also the legacy of dependence on religious and voluntary bodies rather than on the state, I think we have a long way to go, Minister, to prove to people that what we will provide will be the commitments that you have given here. And the only way we will prove that is the details when they arrive. So yes, this debate, I believe, despite the calls from the opposition for it to be held, I believe it is being held too late. But I look forward to a debate on the final arrangements, which I imagine there will be at that time. Can I say what made me come to the conclusion that we should proceed with the current arrangements? And And perhaps there's a pragmatism, and there's many, perhaps among some of the larger parties, and I even hear within Sinn Féin, where people are saying, look, we need to just get on with this. But we need to make sure it's right, but we need to get on with it. And in politics, there is compromises. In politics, you do have to make a very complex and messy situation, which I've described, the legacy of all those decades. You have to work with them to provide that new hospital. And there's many within my party and others that are saying, we need to make sure that we get on with this, but we have to put in place the protections to make sure that those interferences, that those dependencies on voluntary bodies don't exist. So the difficulty for us is that this is going to involve a compromise. There are some reassurances about the public ownership of the building, about the removal of the religious orders, on the governance arrangements, but as I say, we have to wait and see. But it was this letter that actually persuaded me that on balance, we needed to proceed. During the repeal referendum, Dr. Ronan Mahony was somebody that I absolutely listened to during all of the committee hearings over that December and into January. Dr. Ronan Mahony has added her name to this letter, and people have quoted it back and forward. The letter is there for everyone to read about who was using the word misleading and who's using the word misunderstanding. But the letter says we should get on with building the hospital on this site using the broad arrangements that are known to be the case. And on balance, 52 clinicians have far more experience than I in the provision of maternity services. And on balance, 52 clinicians, including somebody who I respect greatly, who I believe has a strong understanding of women's health and of protecting women's health, including reproductive rights, is saying that this arrangement will not compromise those. And so on balance, and awaiting the Minister's final arrangements, I believe we must proceed. We must not have religious interference. We must protect the state investment, but we must build a hospital too.
Thank you very much, Deputy McAuliffe. Deputy Catherine Connolly is using the 5 minutes from the Rural Independent Group.
It's ironic that I've got 5 minutes courtesy of Deputy Matthew McGrath. I want to thank him on the record. There isn't a substance strong enough to calm me down after listening to the nature of this debate. We have used 3 private members' motions in less than a year. We've used our promised legislation. We've used every possible democratic procedure to bring pressure to bear on the government to have a debate. And when we have the debate, not a single female TD from the government side comes in to participate. Not alone that, but we have male politicians coming in who I have the greatest respect for on a personal basis, using the time to obfuscate, to confuse, to talk about a strategy that was discussed earlier today, and not the issue, which is the ownership of the National Maternity Hospital. The speech from the Minister on a benign interpretation is patronising in the extreme, with a narrative designed to confuse and to place the blame on someone else for a failure to take action in relation to this very important subject, a new maternity hospital in the 21st century. On a malign interpretation, it is positively insulting that you would use 3 pages of a speech to use a page and a half to give us a background, to tell me and my colleagues here how important this is, when we have begged, implored and stood up here to say, let's build a national maternity hospital on a public site owned and run by the state, over and over. And you ask the question, you use a letter from doctors in relation to misinformation. You don't clarify that you agree with those doctors, but you take up your speech to tell us what they say. And they tell us that it would be a tragedy, but you didn't use that part if it didn't go ahead. We all think it would be very wrong if the hospital didn't go ahead. There's a whole history here. And let's look at the history very quickly. 2008, KPMG recommends the co-location. 2013, the former Minister, Dr. James Riley, announces the move. So from May 13 onwards, there's been a delay, unacceptable on every level, but not caused by the opposition. How has it been caused? Let's look very briefly in the time I have, courtesy of Deputy Matt McGrath, because of the disinformation that's going out here today. Let's look at what happened. We had the Sisters of Mercy telling us courtesy of the Times, April 17, the Irish Times reports that the Sisters of Charity will own the new publicly funded National Maternity Hospital, and the budget was 300 million, and it goes on. By May 17, after public outrage, we're told, after a month of sustained public and political opposition, the Sisters of Charity announced they're going to withdraw, and they kindly tell us they're going to give us as a gift to us, to the country. But they don't give it as a gift. A new company is supposedly formed and nothing to do with openness or accountability. We still haven't got that gift. Maybe the gentleman here might ask, why did that gift not become a gift? And why hasn't the National Maternity Hospital been built on that site that was being gifted? And what have we got? We've got loads of questions here from all of the opposition in relation to what is the nature of this. And the Minister comes in here today and gives us reassurances. I don't want reassurances. I want to make up my own mind based on documents before me in an open and accountable fashion, and that hasn't happened. And so we go back. We were looking at a 9-year lease with a 50-year option to renew. We were looking at a 909-year lease. We were looking at a 199-year lease. Why? Why are we doing all this? Because the Sisters of Mercy or their agents have absolutely refused to give over the site, either as a gift or to sell it. Absolutely refused. So the question has to be asked, what is behind that refusal? Now maybe the Minister might look up today and ask and tell us what is behind that refusal. How dare you come in and make a speech like that after we were struggling for so long to bring some openness and accountability to this? How dare you do that on the backs of women and children who have suffered to get a national maternity strategy 100 years after 1916, and then in 2021, we found that it wasn't even funded. And it's only been funded from 2021 on the backs of women, Savita Halapanavar in Galway, Portlaoise, Portiuncula, and I could go on, not to mention the hospitals in Lourdes and all of the things that happened to women. How dare you come in and twist the history and tell us a narrative that fits the boys' club? I won't accept it. I won't go over time either, Ciancorla, but it is significant that we asked for this. On a point of order, I make this. We asked for this discussion. We begged for this discussion, and we have the government dominating the discussion today with the amount of time. I have no problem with that whatsoever, but they did not stand up with us when we asked and asked repeatedly for time.
Thank you, Deputy. Can we now go to please? Sorry. Can we go ahead to Deputy Joan Collins, please?
Thank you, Ciancorla, and I concur completely with the points that Deputy has made before me, Deputy Connolly. It's really, I'm nearly shaken with anger from the point of view of the discussion we've had here today. I was at least hoping that we'd get some information, some update in relation to where you are at with talks, negotiations, and all we got was the same as before. I had a topical question in 2 weeks ago, and I was told in that topical question, because you weren't here, it was responded by a Deputy Minister of State, where you were not going to say anything on the matter until you brought your memo to Cabinet. So you're just going to keep rolling on and ignore the Dáil here. But this morning, Minister, in a reply to Deputy Gino Kenny, Minister, you repeated the allegation that there are people spreading misinformation in relation to the issues surrounding the National Maternity Hospital's relocation to the Ellen Park site at St Vincent's Hospital. You raised it again in your speech tonight. Now, you were at pains this morning to point out that it was the midwives and the doctors who were saying this. It wasn't you. But I think tonight you've. But the points that were made by Deputy before me, after the 24th of February, when Professor Higgins was on our Pat Kenny show, you came out with a tweet or Facebook and said that you shared the view that the allegations being made about the provision of services, including by certain Dáil TDs, are misleading, ill-informed and manifestly false. Now, my understanding of spreading misinformation is deliberately distorting the truth. And I'm just insulted by that, Minister, and I'm sure everybody else here in this chamber is the same. I'd like the Minister to clarify exactly who is spreading this so-called misinformation. Is it Dr. Peter Boylan, the former Master of the National Maternity Hospital, Holles Street, a very well-respected member of the medical profession? Is it Dr. Marie Casey, again a respected member of the medical profession? Is it Uplift campaigning group? Is it the elected members of the Dáil who have raised serious concerns about the ownership of the National Maternity Hospital, concerns which are not just held by them, but reflect concerns of many people in our society? Or is the Minister referring to some group of conspiracy theorists on social media? I'd like an answer, because I find it quite insulting, to say the least, to being dismissed as ill-informed despite the intensive efforts I have made to inform myself with medical and legal expertise on the issue, and which I'm also sure that has been done by others raising legitimate questions on the questions of ownership, operational control, and the possibility of Catholic religious ethos being a factor. Everyone wants a maternity hospital built. Everyone wants a maternity hospital built. So I will not accept any sort of turn of phrase that makes out that we in the opposition are not in favour of a hospital being built. And I agree with the doctors and the medics in Holles Street that they want to work in a professional, well-maintained, well-run hospital. I'm going to state what I consider to be some facts. And if I'm wrong, and if I'm misinformed, maybe someone from the government will put me right. Fact 1, the National Maternity Strategy set out an objective to have 4 new maternity hospitals co-located with acute hospitals. The issue of co-location for the National Maternity Hospital at St Vincent's has been taken off the agenda as recommended by the Mulvey report. Am I right or am I wrong in stating that this is a fact? Fact number 2, the question of ownership of the hospital is not clear. The state will not own the land it is to be built on, but will lease the land from a private company, St Vincent's Holdings, which has not yet been established to my knowledge. The state will apparently own the hospital, but not the land it's to be built on. This raises the question, why does the HSE need to negotiate a licence with a private company to run a hospital supposedly owned by the state? Again, maybe somebody could explain to me why this does not raise alarm bells and questions as to who's actually going to own the facility. Finally, we have assurances from the Minister again, repeated this morning about the National Maternity Hospital and here this evening, that there will not be subject to any religious ethos and that all medical procedures legal in the state will be available. I can accept the Minister's seriousness in pursuing this objective, but I believe the wording of any legal agreement must be the subject of a very serious scrutiny, because I find it very hard to believe that the religious sister of charity, the Catholic bishops, the Vatican, will be agreeable to abortion and other legal services being available in a facility that they have an interest in, and they have fought very hard tooth and nail to maintain that interest. So if I and others are misinformed, please set us straight. The issues involved are too serious. The future of women's healthcare and the healthcare in general depend on a resolution of this contentious issue.
Thank you, Deputy Collins. Wait, it's not in order. It's not in order to have clapping in the gallery, I'm sorry. But that's kind of a long-standing tradition.
I don't think we hear anymore.
Well, let's not prejudge. And I'd welcome now a response from Minister Donnelly, please.
Thank you very much, Ken Corla. I had a closing speech, but what I prefer to do instead is just try and address as many of the points raised this evening as I could. Can I start by thanking colleagues for their time and for their contributions this evening? I think it's very important to have this debate. It's one of several we've had, including debates with the Health Committee on this essential issue. What I'm really struck by is the disconnect between the amount of disagreement, which of course we're always going to have, because this is one of the chambers where we will probe the areas where we need to, but to the overshadowing of the very significant agreement on most parts of this project. I think, I'm very happy, obviously colleagues will speak for themselves, but I think we're all agreed that Holles Street is not fit for purpose. I think we're all agreed that co-location is the right approach for all of the reasons that have been laid out, including, I think, Deputy Durkin and others mentioned that several hundred women a year need access to medical services while in Holles Street that Holles Street doesn't have. So I think there's broad agreement that it needs to be co-located. I think there is broad agreement that it must be a state-of-the-art hospital with a very, very significant investment in facilities, in diagnostics, in equipment, in clinicians. I think we all agree that this is really urgent, and I think many deputies have talked about how long it has taken and how long this has been going on for. I think we are all agreed that it must be fully independent, operationally independent, clinically independent, and financially independent. I believe we are all in agreement that, well, maybe not everybody in both houses, but certainly everyone in the debate this evening, that all services must be provided. I think we are in agreement that the state should own the building, and the state will own the building. And I think we're all in agreement that it is our preference, and in many cases strong preference, that the state would own the land. I hope we're all in agreement that there's no option whereby there is no easy option whereby the state could own the land, and pursuing the alternatives, which are, for example, moving the site to somewhere else other than Elm Park, or compulsory purchase order, for example, that all of those options, and certainly the advice I have on all of those options, is that they would carry very, very significant risk of derailing this project, potentially not having it co-located in Elm Park, and at a minimum, adding many, many years to this project. So certainly that's the advice. And so given these final pieces, I think we are in agreement on all of the pieces above. And then given this final piece around the ownership of the land and potentially the governance structures, colleagues quite rightly are looking for guarantees on the full independence of the hospital. And I think that really has been the focus of most of the contributions tonight. So Deputy Cullinan quite rightly said that he wants to see the details, and many colleagues have said that they want to see the details of this. And I feel the frustration. I have listened very carefully. I've taken notes on the frustration being expressed that actually we don't have a legal agreement in front of us, which we'd all like to get into and debate. We will, of course, have that debate, but we're not in a position, there hasn't been government agreement on this legal agreement yet. And so, So the process is, I have to bring the proposal to government. Government will then form a view, and then we will debate it, and the Deputy and others have asked, can this be brought to the Health Committee for detailed interrogation? Absolutely. And not only am I very happy to come along, but what I propose, and the Deputy and I have spoken about this before, is that we bring along the Department of Health, we bring along the HSE, we bring along St Vincent's, we bring along Holles Street as well, because they are the signatories to the agreement and how it's going to work. So unfortunately, what we have here this evening is a debate which is probably slightly too early, in that we'd love to be able to get into the detail. No, deputies, to your questions, the process, and Deputy Shortall, you've been in government, you're well aware of this. I have to bring the proposal to government for government to interrogate it, and then obviously I imagine we'll have more debates like this, but also through the health committee as well. That's the process, Deputy, by which all of these things happen. It's the process by which they all happen.
Can we please let the Minister respond?
Deputy Louisa Riley pointed out rightly that we have to get moving on this, and made reference to the fact that she had been in Holles Street, and indeed her daughter had been in Holles Street giving birth to her granddaughter, and that the new hospital was agreed years ago. And the Deputy also said we have to get this right, and I think a lot of the debate this evening and a lot of the ongoing debate is on exactly this. Deputy, with respect, I am going. Sorry, Deputy. With respect, I'm going through deputy by deputy. I've taken notes on what everyone has said, and I'm trying to answer every deputy.
Well, no, Deputy Shortall, now, please. I do think we need a degree of mutual respect in this debate.
You've put questions, you've made statements. The Minister is in the course of responding, or attempting to respond to those. If there are remaining questions at the end, well, then we can maybe explore how we'll deal with them. But I'm pleased, can we just let the Minister proceed?
Gormagath Ceann Comhairle. Deputy Smith asked when we might see this legal framework, and certainly I'd like to have it very shortly with colleagues to look into. The Deputy also said we need to focus on the speed of delivery, which is something that I very much agree with. Deputy Farrell made, I think, a very salient point, which goes to a lot of the concerns that are being raised, in which he said, and I would agree with him, if we remove religious involvement from ownership, which we are doing, and if we remove religious involvement from governance, which we are doing, then at a simple level, the question of religious influence does become moot. I think it was a Deputy Smith asked if there was anything to read into the question of undue influence. No, absolutely not. You could substitute any influence, Deputy. Maybe it was just a badly chosen word. So it's not to suggest that there is some influence which is religious influence which is okay and some which isn't. What is meant by that is any influence whatsoever. Deputy Cronin raised various points around women needing to be able to access maternity services beyond the reach of the crozier, I think was the phrase you used. And I just want to assure you again, Deputy, there will be no such influence, there will be no such reach, there will be no such involvement directly, indirectly, or in any other way. I would never bring such a proposal to government. Government would never pass such a proposal, and I can promise you that there will be absolutely no involvement of that whatsoever. You quite rightly said there must be no religious influence. I can assure you there will be absolutely no religious influence, directly or indirectly.
Please, can we let the Minister?
And I think Deputy Cronin rightly praised Holles Street. And I think it's something we do need to reflect on. Holles Street we don't own that building. And we don't own the land that the Holles Street building is built on. No one here tonight, or in any contribution I've heard in this debate ever, has suggested that there is undue religious influence, for example, in Holles Street. And if we just think about this, for a second, what's happening? What are we looking to do? We have a hospital about 400 metres from where we're talking this evening, staffed by incredible clinicians, dedicated clinicians who provide a full range of services. And what we're doing is they are signatories to a new agreement whereby they will be moving to a state-of-the-art building on Elm Park. It is they who have signed up to this agreement, and it is they who are saying that they will have full independence. I believe that the clinicians, the midwives and the doctors in Holles Street would never in a million years surrender their independence. And they haven't. They have not only Deputy, not only have they seen the contract. Holles Street have written the contract. They're one of the contracting parties. So they have been involved. They have been involved in creating it, Deputy. If there's a bit of
Please, can we let the Minister conclude?
Thanks.
Can we let the Minister conclude, please? And then we will see where we go with this.
I would, and if I could just get possibly a minute or two. Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Deputy Shortall has raised several points. She made several statements, and she asked why I wasn't looking up while she was speaking. It's because I was trying to write down verbatim of the statements that she made, and I think this really goes to the heart of some of the debate. So the Deputy has said there are no guarantees around the independence of ethos or secular ethos. There are such guarantees. The Deputy said that she wants the hospital to be publicly owned. It will be owned. The Deputy has said, and I quote, "The National Maternity Hospital will lose all of its independence." This is simply a false statement. It has absolutely no basis in fact. The Deputy has said that it would be handed over into private hands. Again, this is not true. The Deputy has said that it will be a maternity hospital controlled by a religious entity. Like, Ken Corlett, these statements, obviously the Deputy is free to express her views, but these statements are simply not true. And they're causing an awful lot of concern amongst people who quite rightly want to know that there is an independent hospital. The Deputy has said that we're...
Can we desist from heckling the Minister while he's attempting to deal with the questions you've asked? You mightn't like the answers he's given, but would you at least let him give the answers?
And the Deputy said that we're, quote, handing over €1 billion asset. We're not handing over €1 billion asset to anybody. We own the asset. The asset is the building. We will own the building when it is built. We will own the building at all times. We will own everything inside the building. So we're simply not handing over €1 billion asset to anybody. So these statements, look, I take you that you are genuinely concerned about the independence. I accept that, Deputy. But the statements you're making simply, they're simply not true. They're simply not true. They're simply not true.
We can't. No, sorry, please, no. Let's be clear. We cannot have a situation in the House where, in a debate on any particular subject, a member decides that they're going to continue to make their own personal assertions about what a situation might or might not be, and that is not debate. I think both you, Deputy Shortall, and Deputy Connolly have raised a question that, Minister, I'd ask you if you could bring clarity to so that we could wind up this discussion. And that is around whether or not you have indicated you would bring this matter to Cabinet. You've indicated that you would bring it to the Health Committee and that you would have all the component parties involved in the debate at committee, and that there might possibly be a debate here on the matter. And the question has reasonably been asked, will that happen before a contract is signed?
It will happen after I have brought it to government. Now, government may decide to approve it. Government may decide not to approve it.
But now, please, let's not start again.
So
can we have government will make a decision in principle, I assume?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the government, which can make a decision, can decide to reverse that decision if they want to at another stage. That's the prerogative of government.
Or indeed, Ken Corlett, they may choose not to accept the proposal that I bring. Exactly. I don't know. Okay. All I can say is I have to, as Minister for Health, bring the proposal to government. And
so I think that represents a very clear...
You know I have to do that.
That's as clear a response as we can expect this Minister or any Minister to give. Wait. Sorry, Deputy?
20 seconds.
Well, he has.
The question is, will he bring the
well, no, he has.
to the law before it's signed off on?
He's answered the question.
Sorry,
can we hear that? I'm going to wrap up now in a minute. Quickly, yes, Deputy Cullinan.
The Minister is saying he has to bring it to Cabinet, which he does. But he could bring it to an Oireachtas committee first, before he brings it to Cabinet. And that's within the gift of the Minister.
Bringing it to the Oireachtas committee first.
Of course there is.
There is going to be some sort of indication from Cabinet whether the Cabinet
because then he can bring it to
or not.
Then he can bring it to Cabinet after it has been properly interrogated by the relevant Oireachtas committee. There's no point bringing it to us when it's a fait accompli, when the Cabinet has signed off on it. Look, he has the opportunity to bring it to an Oireachtas committee
we're not going to get unanimous agreement on this. I think people's positions are quite clear, and I have to say that the time for the debate has concluded at this stage, and the debate is ended. I thank all of you who have participated. So the statements on the National Maternity Hospital are completed, and the Dáil stands adjourned until next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Thank you all for your